Mythbusters series. I'm your host, Suresh GP, and I have my co-host, Michael Fulton, joining us. And we have something to talk about today that will probably look at whether it's a myth to be busted. So for people who are joining it for the first time, Mike, do you want to give a little bit of background of what is this IT Mythbusters series? And
Sure, I'd be happy to, Suresh. Nice to see everyone. Good to see you again, Suresh. Here at the IT Mythbusters, we're piggybacking off of a historical show that used to be called Mythbusters. We bring a hot topic in IT that maybe has some folks discussing it, maybe has some pros and some cons, and we bring it forward as a potential myth to either be affirmed or busted, depending on whether we think it's true or false. So today, I think you've got a great topic lined up for us, Suresh. What are you wanting to talk about today?
well, I think I get this topic every time when I go for conferences as well as things to do it. We all are from IT. There's a lot of things talking about IT, moving up that value chain and making it much more impactful. Very difficult today to quantify the value of IT. What do you think? Is it a myth, or do you have any kind of references that you can tell about quantifying the value of IT? Because I think we have talked a little bit about projects and programs, but somehow people are not so comfortable that we can tangibly measure and say, this is the value that I got from IT. Seem to be an eluding term. I don't know whether this is even applicable.
Is it possible?
Is it possible?
The value of IT? I think that's a great question. And I think this will be a good one for us to explore today. So when I think about quantifying the value of IT, right, one of the things that I've heard over and over again is people talking about table stakes. We have to do this project. It's table stakes. It's a base expectation.
Right.
And I think that's a place we got to start, right? I think that's a fallacy that we ever need to really look at a technology and say, we have to put that technology in, because if we don't, our business is going to go out from under, right? I think we still have to do the due diligence in every single case to try to bring this back to true value. Now, in some cases, the value may be easier for us to articulate, right? And it may make the answer of should we implement an email system, or should we put a Wi-Fi network in, it may make that an easy answer, but it's still important that we ask the question, in my opinion.
So one of the things I look at this into a dimension of, instead of talking about value creation, we also have to talk about value leakage. For example, how many times that you have seen that the business is confident that your systems are going to be up and running and they don't have an unplanned outage? How much of the times that you can ensure your risk and compliance is met so that you are confined to your audit regulations and you are safeguarding the interest of your customers and employees? Now, these are very important aspects that people don't understand. So a basic understanding is not just looking at value creation, but how much of value leakage that you have prevented. I was talking to one of the guys on the other day and asked this question: how many of your projects have you killed in the last 6 months? And many people say, well, we kickstarted the project, so we need to continue doing that.
Right.
Why would you do that? When you know that your business case that you actually thought that would come to limelight and it could deliver value is not doing, can you kill the project? And I think that is a very important way of looking at it, because it's not just always about value creation, it's just identifying things that could go wrong. That will be much more beneficial because you are preventing that fiasco from happening in the first place.
Yeah, so to your point, I think, right, what you're starting to allude to, right, is I think that there's kind of three pieces that we have to look at related to that cycle of value, right? There's the upfront identification of what we expect the value to be, right? That cost benefit analysis we're going to do up front. And we'll come back to that in a minute. There's the ongoing decision on whether we believe in the middle of that project that we're going to deliver the value we expect, and should we shut the project down. And then there's the final results, the project's put in place. How do we extract the full value? How do we realize all of the benefits of the project that we expected coming out the other side, right? So I think we have to think about and consider all three of those. If we start at the front, right, the model, and you and I have talked about this model many, many times, right? The model I like to use when I think about the business case is better, faster, cheaper, safer, right? It's all about value across those four dimensions, right? How is this investment going to make things better? Can we quantify the improvement to the organization, the improvement to the end deliverable to the customer, the improvement in revenue, whatever it might be? How do we quantify how much better we're going to be by taking this project on? Faster is a critically important element. How do we understand, make our ability to get things to market more quickly than our competition? How can we be more effective at getting products out the door, right? Or getting that new product innovation out the door when it comes to our ongoing business. Cheaper is obvious. We think about that a lot when it comes to technology. But how do we bring our technology costs down, or how do we bring our business costs down, make our business more productive with the projects that we're running? And then safer, how do we actually reduce the risk to the organization? And I think you hit on a great example of risk reduction that we don't often talk about, right? If our technology solutions bring that manufacturing line down once a month for 2 hours, how much does that cost the business, right? We can quantify the impact to the business of that manufacturing line being down for 2 hours. We can estimate the frequency of occurrence, right? And we start to get a formulaic equation of what's the risk to the business of this outage occurring. And that allows us to understand the value of running a project to actually reduce that risk, right? So better, faster, cheaper, safer is a really important part of the upfront process. So you want to talk a little bit about the middle, or do you want to go back to better, faster, cheaper, safer a little bit?
I'm going to go to another spin altogether in terms of sustainability, which is a very important part of sustainable IT for business. So for example, today, as I talk with a lot of my clients, we are talking about reducing the carbon footprint, reducing the kind of reusable component, right? Making sure that the planet is safer in the way it is being managed. And how do we look at recycling and reusing some of those parts and part of it? So I also think when you talk about value dimension, we need to look at sustainable IT in a way that we can continue driving this moving forward in the most optimum means, so that the society is actually getting benefited and making sure that is done. So it's a very important part of sustainable IT as an initiative that is happening in many of the organizations to showcase value as a part of the corporate social responsibility that they are asking people to do sustainability. That is one. The second one that I think we have to think about is don't start with a business case, start with a value plan. And what I mean to say is, to your point, I want to have different stakeholders value plan based on the persona. So if it's going to be IT director, if it's going to be the end user, if it's going to be the service desk, I want to have 3 or 4 different value plans defined, identified, and then that feeds into the business case to do it. Because what we are doing it, we create one business case and we say, hey, everything should fit into that overall benefits to do that. It doesn't work because I'm not able to resonate with my role as an IT director towards someone who is an enterprise architect, because their needs and aspirations are totally different. So as we start to quantify the value of IT, I think it has to be value lies on the eye of the beholder. So you have to be clearly identifying 2 or 3 key personas that you can bring about it, understand the identification part of it, then go about the measurement part and the realization part, the front, the middle, and the final piece, and ask them how much this is actually relevant, and then they do forward. So I think these are a couple of aspects I was thinking that when you talked about value of IT, do you start with the value plan? Do you make this more sustainable rather than just doing it at one-off of its kind when you drive this?
I love that nugget, Suresh, and it's a nugget that I don't want people to miss, right? This idea of a value plan. So many times when you think about initiating a technology project, we go straight to the business case spreadsheet, right? And we start cranking the numbers out and really focusing on costs and benefits and all this piece. What the concept of a value plan does is it forces you to take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and consider all of the different perspectives.
Right.
So often when we do in my experience, at least, when I've been involved with doing a business case for a particular project, we tend to view things from a single perspective. Right. We tend to view things from the payer's perspective many times. Right. And it is important to look at things from all these multiple perspectives. And by looking at it from the top down with a value plan, we're able to quickly and easily drive to how we're really going to see that value extract itself. And then once we've identified the ways that we're going to do that, translating that into dollars and cents becomes a lot easier, becomes a lot more obvious how we're going to get there. If you try and work it from the other direction, like we historically have done in business cases, it's just harder to do, right? It's just harder to do. So I love that nugget. Now, back to your thing about sustainable IT. I think sustainable IT is a fascinating topic, and especially in this conversation of value, right? And in a capitalistic society like we are here in the US, right? One would argue that you don't, as a business, do things for the good of society, right? In a capitalistic society, you do things for the good of the business.
Right.
So if we're talking about sustainable IT, how is that tied back to the good of the business? And I think it's typically one of two ways. Number one, it's that typical, well, by doing sustainable IT, we can actually drive our costs down. Right. And a lot of different ways that sustainable IT can add value through cost savings. But the more important one in this case, I think, is understanding the revenue impact, right? Because by doing sustainable IT, you in many organizations will actually see higher revenues from the sales of your product when you can talk about the fact you were able to deliver them sustainably, right? So that piece and how you quantify that back is really important. Some organizations are able to just wave their hands and say, we're not going to tie sustainable IT back to the bottom line. We just think it's a good thing to do. But in my mind, if you really want to talk about value, I think you've got to figure out how to draw the line between sustainable IT back to one of those 4 value drivers. And I think it can be done.
Correct.
But I think we have to go through the effort.
Right, absolutely. So my take on that one is to look at the triple bottom line. So which we
triple bottom line.
People, purpose, and planet. So it goes back to that why. Why does your organization exist at the first place? You know, for example, what are you going to create? For example, in your case, Benoit is probably looking at talent as a human capital. You know, we don't longer call people as human assets, a human capital, which is a great way to look at it because you're impacting lives of people who are aspirational in nature. That's the why. Because when I know your why, that's the purpose. The second one is, do you bring in that people with that skills and competencies who would be able to deliver that value? The second part. And then the planet. How are you going to leave this place a better place to live in? Which means, how are you going to use the technology, use the part to make sure that your environment, your resources all are looking good? So I think we need to take a step back to think about this as a triple bottom line of people, purpose, and planet. Because at the end of the day, it's not always about business. And to be fair, there's a lot of US companies that are focusing on that aspect of sustainability. It's just trying to catch up gear. So I think the value of IT should be looked at. What does value look from your perspective? And then start building those value plans, that's structures, that techniques to do it. Because I think the problem is not measuring the value of IT. It's understanding what you really want at the first place. And are we convinced that this is the right way to go forward? The rest of the things will fall in place automatically.
All right. Very fun. So what do you think, Suresh? We've been talking about this idea of it being difficult, nay, impossible to quantify the value of IT. What do you think? Have we busted
Well,
that myth, or is it
we
going
have
to
busted the myth, and we have to understand that if we don't quantify the value of IT, you and I will not have jobs tomorrow. So
Right.
the question really is about understanding how is it perceived, how it has to be presented, and more importantly, are we measuring with the same yardstick? I think it's now time to have
Oh,
a
yeah.
different yardstick and measure what does the value of IT looks like.
Love it. Love it.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Suresh, always a pleasure. I think it's time to wrap this episode 16 of our IT Mythbusters series. Check us out. We'll be back to you soon with our next episode. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Mike.